The boy was barefoot, bleeding, and hiding from headlights when I found him. He couldn't have been more than 7, small, thin, soaked through from the rain that had been falling for hours. His jeans were ripped at the knees, his shirt clung to his chest, and the wind howled against the empty road like the city itself wanted him forgotten. The faint glow from an old gas station sign flickered over him, casting short bursts of light across his pale face. For a moment, I thought he was just a shadow. Then he moved, a tiny, trembling thing curled against a rusted fuel pump, clutching a backpack too heavy for a child that size. I should have kept walking. That's what life had taught me. When you're poor and alone, survival is a quiet thing. You don't look. You don't ask. You keep your head down and pray the world forgets you before it decides to hurt you again. I had already worked a double shift at the diner. My shoes were soaked through, my stomach empty, and the night colder than it had any right to be. But I saw his eyes, wide, terrified, desperate, and something in me cracked open. I'd seen that look before in the mirror, on the nights I tried to convince myself that life still had a purpose. He was shaking so hard I could hear his teeth chatter. Every sound, the hum of passing cars, the bark of distant dogs, made him flinch. When I noticed the rope marks circling his wrists, my breath caught. That was the moment everything shifted. The rain came harder, drumming against the cracked pavement as I stood there, caught between instinct and fear. I told myself to move on. This wasn't my problem. I had nothing to give, not food, not shelter, not even warmth. I was barely surviving my own story. But I couldn't turn away. The boy's small frame was swallowed by the storm, and with every second I hesitated, it felt like the world was daring me to prove I still had some humanity left. I didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from, didn't know what kind of danger left a child alone on a road like this, but I knew danger when I saw it. There was fear on him, not the kind that comes from being lost, but the kind that comes from being hunted. Somewhere down the street, an engine roared to life. Headlights swept briefly across the wet concrete, and the boy ducked lower, clutching that torn backpack like it was the only thing keeping him alive. That's when I realized whoever he was running from, they were close. The air shifted. The rain didn't just fall, it pressed. The kind of silence that comes before something terrible hung heavy in my chest. I looked down at the boy again, and I knew I couldn't leave him there. I moved before my mind caught up with my body. The sound of shouting broke through the storm, men's voices, angry, sharp. Their footsteps splashed through puddles somewhere nearby. The boy pressed his face into his knees, trying not to cry, and I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. They were looking for him. And somehow, I'd already chosen a side. I pulled him up by the hand, and we ran. The rain blinded me, the wind burned my skin, and my heartbeat drowned out everything else. All I could think about was finding shelter, anywhere that wasn't here. We didn't stop until the city lights faded and the old church at the corner came into view. The doors were unlocked. They always were. Inside, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like mercy. I didn't know yet who the boy belonged to. I didn't know that his last name carried more weight in this city than most men's lives. I didn't know that the number he whispered, the one I would call from the church phone, would summon the kind of power people spent their whole lives running from. All I knew was that I had found a frightened child in the rain, and something inside me, something I thought I'd lost, told me to help him. But that choice that changed everything. Because the man who answered that call wasn't a father. He was a storm wearing human skin. And when he walked into that church an hour later, cold, composed, and dangerous, he looked at me like I was a problem he didn't know how to solve. That was the night I met Jeremy Gardner. The night a poor woman with nothing stumbled into a world built on blood and power. The night compassion became my biggest mistake. I thought I was saving a boy. I didn't know I was stepping into the lion's den. That was where it began, with rain, fear, and a boy who should never have been alone. Everything that came after, the mansion, the danger, the man who tried to buy my soul with money, all of it started there on that road. And if I had known who Jaden really was, or the kind of man his father truly became when someone touched what was his, maybe I would have kept walking. But I didn't. And that single act of kindness turned my quiet, empty life into a storm I could never escape. The church was so quiet I could hear the rain sliding down the stained glass windows. Every candle flickered like it was afraid of the wind. The boy sat beside me on the pew, his small fingers tangled around mine, refusing to let go. He hadn't spoken in minutes, just stared at the heavy wooden doors as though he expected them to break open at any second. The old rotary phone in Father Miguel's office still hummed in my ears. The voice that answered had been cold and efficient, not panicked, not even worried, just precise. "Stay where you are." That's all he said before the line went dead. And now we were waiting. I don't know what I expected. A desperate father, maybe. Someone who would burst through the door shouting his son's name, weeping, grateful, human. But what came instead was thunder made flesh. The doors slammed open with a sound that made the candles shiver. Wind and rain followed 3 men in black suits, dripping water onto the old wooden floor. They didn't look like rescuers. They looked like soldiers. Each step they took seemed to carry its own gravity, their eyes sweeping the church, scanning shadows before settling on the boy. Then he walked in. Jeremy Gardner. Even before I knew his name, I knew what he was. There's a certain stillness that powerful men wear, a calm that isn't peace but control sharpened to a blade. He didn't need to shout. The room obeyed him by instinct. His coat was dark wool, his shoes silent, his hair slicked back from a face carved in discipline. But it was his eyes that froze me, eyes the color of a winter morning right before a storm breaks. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the boy. "Jaden," he said, and the sound of that name felt like both a command and a prayer. The boy jerked up from the pew, his small frame trembling, then ran, not with fear, but relief that hurt to watch. He buried his face in the man's coat, sobbing into the fabric. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet again. Jeremy's hand came up, resting on the boy's back, steady, almost tender. Then it dropped. His gaze lifted, finding me across the pews. There was no gratitude in it. No relief. Just calculation. He studied me like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or destroy. I stood, unsure what to say, aware of how small I looked, drenched clothes clinging to my skin, hair plastered to my face, shoes leaving muddy prints on sacred ground. Father Miguel appeared from the shadows, murmuring something about sanctuary and grace. But Jeremy's attention never wavered. The air in the church had changed, thicker somehow, heavier. He took a slow step forward. The sound of his shoes on stone echoed louder than it should have. When he stopped in front of me, the difference between our worlds became painfully clear. His coat smelled of expensive cologne and rain. Mine, of coffee and old grease. "You were the one who called," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I nodded. He was alone on the road. He looked down at Jaden, then back at me. "And you helped him?" It wasn't a question. Yes. He held my stare for a long moment, unreadable. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a wallet thick enough to feed me for a year, and peeled back the leather like it was nothing. The cash came out in clean, precise folds, crisp, green, endless. He laid it on the pew between us, a small, perfect mountain. "Name your price." His words were colder than the rain outside. It wasn't gratitude, it was a transaction. A way to make something human fit neatly into his world of control. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my pulse quickened. The boy, Jaden, was still clinging to his father's coat, looking up at me like he didn't understand what was happening. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was too young to know that sometimes money is just another way to erase a person. I swallowed hard. "Keep it," I said quietly. "Just make sure he feels safe again." The silence that followed was the longest sound I'd ever heard. Jeremy's eyes didn't change, but something behind them did. A flicker, a hesitation, a shadow of surprise. Men like him aren't used to being refused. His jaw shifted once, the muscle tightening just beneath his cheekbone. Then he reached forward, slowly, and pushed the money back into his wallet. Every movement deliberate, rehearsed, controlled. "Understood," he said. But there was something in the way he said it, something that made the word feel less like acknowledgement and more like a note taken. Father Miguel cleared his throat, whispering a blessing I barely heard. I only remember Jeremy's men turning toward the door, scanning again before signaling that it was safe to leave. Jaden looked at me once more. There was confusion in his eyes, maybe disappointment, maybe trust. He started to reach for me, but his father's hand came down, firm and final, guiding him away. I wanted to say something, goodbye, maybe, but the words never found air. As they stepped into the storm, Jeremy turned back for a single moment. Rain streaked across the threshold, light glinting off his coat buttons. People who do good in this city, he said softly, rarely stay safe for long. Then he was gone. The door shut behind him, and with it went the temperature, the noise, the air. Only the echo of his footsteps remained, fading into the sound of rain. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where he'd been. My hands were still trembling, not from fear exactly, but from the feeling that something had just shifted, like I'd brushed against a fault line I wasn't supposed to touch. Father Miguel came to stand beside me. His expression was gentle, but his eyes were troubled. "You should go home now," he said quietly, "and maybe stay away from whatever that was." I nodded, though I knew better. Whatever that was, it wasn't finished with me. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It came down harder now, drumming on the pavement as if trying to wash the night clean. I pulled my jacket tighter, stepping into the storm with my head down. The city glowed faintly in the distance, orange and gold through the fog. Every streetlight buzzed with the kind of silence that hides secrets. I walked fast, heart still racing, trying to convince myself that it was over. I'd done my part. I'd saved a boy. The rest wasn't my concern. But the feeling wouldn't leave me. That strange pull, that quiet unease. Halfway home, I turned onto the narrow industrial road again. The puddles mirrored the city's lights, fractured and trembling. The world looked different now, sharper somehow, as if danger had adjusted its focus. Then I heard it, the low hum of an engine behind me. Slow, unhurried, too careful to be random. I didn't look back at first. Just kept walking, pretending I didn't notice the headlights stretching long shadows across the wet asphalt. But when I reached the corner and glanced over my shoulder, my stomach dropped. 2 black cars. Windows tinted, engines barely audible over the rain. They were keeping their distance. Watching. I didn't run. I just kept walking, one foot after another, pretending my heartbeat wasn't thundering loud enough to draw attention. The city lights swallowed me whole, but I knew, deep down, that I hadn't left the storm behind. It was following me home, and its name was Jeremy Gardner. For 2 days, I didn't sleep right. The rain had stopped, but the sound of it hadn't left my head. Every time a car passed under my window, headlights sweeping across the walls, my chest tightened. The hum of engines had a new weight now, the kind that carried memory. I told myself it was over. I told myself Jeremy Gardner was the kind of man who lived in a different world, a world that had brushed mine for a single, accidental moment. People like him didn't remember women like me. But the truth was, I'd felt his presence ever since that night, like an echo that refused to fade. It was just after noon when the knock came. Sharp, precise. The kind of knock that doesn't ask permission to be answered. I froze halfway through folding a stack of uniforms for my next shift at the diner. When the knock came again, I heard something metallic in it, not the sound itself, but the authority behind it. I opened the door only halfway. 2 men stood there, both in black suits, both dry, despite the mist outside. They didn't smile. "Miss Daniela Parker?" one asked. His tone wasn't polite. It was factual. I hesitated. "Who's asking?" "Mr. Gardner sent us," he said, and just like that, the air in my small apartment changed. Behind them, a black sedan idled quietly by the curb. The kind of car you don't see often in this neighborhood. The kind that doesn't belong. I gripped the edge of the door. "Tell him I appreciate the thought, but I don't need anything." I already said no. The taller one, the one with the colder eyes, didn't blink. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about safety." "Safety." He nodded once. The men who took the boy, they're still out there. And they know you saw their faces. The words hit harder than I expected. I hadn't even realized I had seen their faces. Just flashes in the dark, movement, a shout, the glint of metal. But now, standing there, I remembered enough. You think they'd come after me?
We don't think, he said.
We know. Silence stretched between us. My heart thudded. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. Jeremy Gardner's world had followed me home. The man's gaze flicked over my shoulder, scanning the tiny apartment like it was already a liability. Mr. Gardner insists you stay somewhere more secure, he said. Just until the matter is handled. I can't just leave, I started. I have a job. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me an envelope. Thick, heavy. Mr. Gardner's already spoken to your employer. You're on paid leave. I didn't even open it. I didn't need to. Sometimes power doesn't raise its voice. It just rearranges your life without asking. I looked back into my apartment. The flickering lamp, the peeling paint, the half-washed dishes, and realized that whatever safety I thought I had left had been an illusion anyway. I nodded once. Give me 5 minutes. The drive was long. Too long. We left the city behind. The noise, the neon, the faint smell of wet asphalt, until all that was left were trees and silence. The sky was bruised gray, the kind that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. When the car finally slowed, I saw them. Gold gates taller than any dream I'd ever dared to have. They opened without a sound, as if even the wind obeyed whatever lived behind them. The mansion appeared like something out of another lifetime. Marble steps, windows that caught the weak sunlight like mirrors, statues that seemed to watch as we passed. I stepped out of the car, feeling smaller than I ever had before. The air smelled of pine and money. Inside, the floors gleamed white and cold. A chandelier hung above the entrance like a frozen storm, throwing light across the marble. Everything was too perfect, too quiet. Even my footsteps felt like trespassing. And then I saw him. Jeremy stood at the end of the hallway, flanked by silence. He wore a dark vest, no tie, sleeves rolled to his elbows. There was something methodical about him. Every movement measured, every breath calculated. Miss Parker, he said, voice steady, almost polite. I wasn't sure you'd come. I didn't have much choice, I said softly. His eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. We all have choices. Some just come with heavier consequences. Before I could reply, a small voice broke through the stillness. Miss Daniela. Jaden. He ran down the grand staircase barefoot, his laughter cutting through the tension like sunlight through fog. He stopped short in front of me, his face bright, eyes wide. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that look, unfiltered innocence in a place built on fear. I knelt. Hey, kiddo. He threw his arms around me before I could brace myself. For a moment, everything else disappeared. When I looked up, Jeremy was watching. Not with anger. Not with warmth either. Just intensity. She's the reason I'm here, Jaden told him proudly, as if his father needed reminding. Jeremy's gaze didn't shift. I know, he said quietly. And that's exactly why she's staying. The words hit me like cold water. Staying? I echoed. He turned, motioning for me to follow. Until things are secure. My men will handle the investigation, but you'll be safer here. Safer. That word again, the one that always seemed to mean something else when spoken by men like him. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him I didn't belong in this place of marble and secrets. But the thought of those kidnappers, faceless, angry, shadowed every argument I tried to form. So I followed. He led me through hallways lined with portraits, old faces, sharp eyes, generations of Gardners staring down like silent judges. Every corner smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. We stopped at a room on the second floor. It was beautiful, too beautiful. A canopy bed, silk curtains, a fireplace that looked untouched. This will be yours, Jeremy said. I looked around. It's more than I need. It's what's available. His tone left no room for debate. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "If you need anything, ask Mrs. Duval. She manages the household." I nodded. "And how long am I supposed to stay?" His answer was quiet, but it sank like a stone. "Until I decide it's safe." Then he was gone. I waited until the sound of his footsteps faded before trying the door. It closed smoothly, too smoothly. I turned the handle again. It clicked, but didn't open.
Locked.
From the outside. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the polished handle, feeling the realization spread like frost across my skin. This wasn't protection. This was possession. Through the window, I could see the driveway curving into the forest, long, winding, impossible to reach without permission. The world beyond those gates felt like a dream I'd already woken from. Somewhere below, I heard Jaden laughing, the sound echoing through the marble halls. For a moment, I let it ground me. That laugh was the only real thing in this place. The only reason I was still here. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the quiet hum of a house too big for comfort. The air smelled faintly of lilac and iron. Night began to fall outside, turning the windows into mirrors. And somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, I realized something simple and terrifying. I hadn't been invited here. I'd been claimed. When the door opened hours later, I didn't move. Jeremy stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to your new home," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, a promise or a warning, I couldn't tell which. At least until I decide otherwise. Morning came softly, like the house was deciding whether to let the light in at all. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that holds its breath between secrets. When I stepped into the hallway, the world outside my locked room had already reset itself. The air smelled of polish and citrus. Somewhere far away, I could hear faint piano music, steady and sad. Mrs. Duval found me before I could find my way downstairs. She was an older woman, the kind whose face carried no expression but understanding, or perhaps endurance. Her uniform was crisp, her posture perfect. "Good morning, Miss Parker," she said, like I'd been expected to play a part one didn't know existed. "Breakfast is at 8. The master prefers punctuality."
I didn't ask which master she meant.
Downstairs, the dining hall was too long for one family. Jaden sat halfway down the table, his small figure dwarfed by the high-backed chair. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that actually reached his eyes. "Miss Daniela," he called, waving a spoon. Jeremy Gardner sat at the head of the table. No tie again. Shirt sleeves rolled, cuffs damp from what I guessed was an early morning storm inspection. He looked up from his newspaper, and for a second, his gaze pinned me where I stood.
"Good morning," he said.
I nodded, unsure of the rules. "Morning." He gestured toward the seat beside Jaden.
"Sit."
"He's been asking for you." It wasn't a request. I sat. The plates gleamed, the food looked too perfect, too untouched. I hadn't eaten a proper breakfast in months, but I forced myself to take small bites. Jeremy didn't speak again. He simply watched his son, or maybe he watched me watching his son. I couldn't tell. Jaden filled the silence. "Miss Daniela, guess what? I get to feed the horses later." I smiled faintly. "Horses, huh? You didn't tell me your dad had horses." He grinned. "He has everything." Jeremy's jaw tensed, just slightly. He folded the newspaper. "Not everything," he said quietly, and for a moment, the silence turned sharp. Mrs. Duval appeared again, setting down another cup of coffee before vanishing into the walls like a ghost trained not to linger. After breakfast, Jaden tugged my sleeve. "Come on, I'll show you the garden." I followed him through a pair of glass doors that opened onto an expanse of manicured perfection, trimmed hedges, marble statues, fountains that whispered. The air smelled of wet grass and old money. For a moment, it almost felt normal. A woman and a child in a garden, sunlight soft on their faces. But even here, the rules followed. "Miss Daniela," Jaden said, glancing toward the mansion's east wing. "We're not supposed to go that way." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Dad says it's dangerous." I looked in that direction, an older part of the house, darker stone, fewer windows. What's there? He lowered his voice, like repeating a secret. That's where the bad men go. My pulse skipped. Bad men? He nodded solemnly. The ones who hurt people. Daddy says that's where they learn their lesson. I didn't ask more. Some answers were better left untouched. We spent the rest of the afternoon chasing shadows across the garden. Jaden's laughter echoed against the stone walls, a sound that didn't belong in a place built for power. It belonged somewhere free. Later, when he tripped over a root and scraped his knee, instinct kicked in. I knelt, dabbing at the cut with the hem of my sleeve. He winced, but didn't cry. You sound like Mama, he whispered, watching me. It caught me off guard. You remember her? He nodded. Sometimes. Mostly in dreams. Daddy doesn't like to talk about her. I smiled sadly. Some memories hurt too much to say out loud. That night, I learned the mansion had its own rhythm. After sunset, everything changed. Doors that stayed open during the day were locked. The hallways emptied. The staff moved quickly, quietly, eyes low, steps soft. Mrs. Duval caught me near the stairs after dinner. It's best not to wander after dark, Miss Parker. Why? Because rules exist for a reason here. She hesitated, then added, and because curiosity is rarely rewarded in this house. I nodded, though I didn't promise obedience. Later, as I tucked Jaden into bed, he stirred restlessly. His small hand clutched the blanket tight. The man in the black gloves, he murmured suddenly, half asleep. My heart stopped. What man? He turned slightly, eyelids fluttering. He said not to scream. He said Daddy wouldn't find me. My stomach twisted. Jaden, did you see his face? He nodded weakly. He works for Daddy. The words dropped between us like a stone in still water. I smoothed his hair, forcing my voice steady. You're safe now, okay? No one's going to hurt you here. But I wasn't sure I believed it. When he drifted off, I stayed by his bed longer than I needed to, listening to his breathing, trying to convince myself that a mansion this guarded could protect him from the kind of danger that lives inside walls, not beyond them. Outside the window, thunder rolled faintly, distant, but familiar. Hours later, I woke to voices. They weren't loud, but sharp enough to slice through the quiet. I slipped from bed, crossing the dark hallway barefoot until I reached the grand staircase. Down below, light spilled from the study door, golden and thin, like a blade. Two men stood outside. Their words carried just enough for me to hear. The traitor's still inside. Gardner doesn't know who yet. Doesn't matter. When he finds him, it'll be worse than death. A pause. A faint chuckle. He'll make it personal this time. The boy changed him. My blood went cold. I pressed myself against the wall, listening harder. Think he suspects us? One asked. The other exhaled smoke. Doesn't matter what he suspects. If he finds out Jaden recognized one of us, we're dead anyway. Footsteps. Then silence. I didn't breathe until they were gone. When I crept back toward my room, every floorboard seemed to echo louder than before. I slid under the blanket, though sleep was impossible. My mind spun with the words, traitor, inside, recognized. Jaden's whisper came back to me like an echo. He works for Daddy. The clock ticked. The house held its breath again. Then, sometime after midnight, it came, the sound that shattered everything. A scream. Not loud, not long, but real, muffled, from below. I sat up instantly. Another noise followed, a thud, then silence again. The kind of silence that swallows itself whole. I didn't need to wonder where it came from. The East Wing. The one Jaden said was for bad men. I stared at the dark ceiling, pulse hammering, afraid to move, afraid not to. That night, I understood what the mansion really was. It wasn't a home. It was a cage made of marble and gold. And I wasn't living in it. I was surviving inside it. The scream didn't leave my head, even after the night went quiet again. It echoed inside me, raw, human, and cut short too soon. I lay in bed until dawn, every nerve awake, every shadow whispering. When morning finally came, it wasn't relief that greeted me. It was the kind of silence that follows something unforgivable. The house smelled faintly of bleach.
No one spoke about it.
The staff moved slower that morning, eyes downcast, faces drained of sleep. Whatever had happened in the East Wing had been cleaned, erased, and buried under breakfast trays and polished floors. But the air carried it, that faint, metallic trace of fear. I couldn't stand it. I waited until Jaden was with Mrs. Duval for lessons, then followed the faint hum of voices down the corridor. It led to the study, the one room no one entered without invitation. The door was open just enough to hear them. He talked, one of Jeremy's men said. Told us who paid for it. Jeremy's voice was calm, too calm. And someone inside the network. We're still tracing the order. Keep tracing. His tone dropped lower. And make sure the boy never hears what was done. I froze, my pulse loud in my ears.
The boy.
Jaden. The scream. Something inside me snapped. The same instinct that had made me stop for a child in the rain now pushed me straight into a man-storm. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped into the room. Jeremy turned. He didn't look surprised, just mildly annoyed, like he'd expected this. His eyes were pale and unflinching, a winter sky after a storm. Miss Parker, he said evenly. I was told you don't enter rooms uninvited. Maybe you should lock them, I said. My voice shook, but I didn't care. I heard someone last night. I know what you did. He dismissed the guards with a glance. When the door shut, the silence pressed in. Be careful with your words, he said finally. You don't know what you think you know. I know someone screamed. I took a step forward. And now the house smells like something died. He looked at me for a long time, his jaw tight. Then he stood, slow and deliberate, crossing the distance between us. What did you think this place was, Daniela? A sanctuary? I thought it was a home. He almost smiled. Almost. Homes don't exist in my world. Only fortresses. You saved my son's life. And now I'm protecting his future. By torturing people? By eliminating threats, he corrected. His voice was smooth, practiced. There's a difference. I shook my head.
No.
There isn't. He studied me, as if trying to decide whether I was brave or stupid. You think the world cares about mercy? I think you've forgotten what mercy even looks like. That hit him. I saw it. The flash of something behind his eyes, brief but real. He turned away, poured himself a drink he didn't seem to want, and spoke quieter now. You saved Jaden's life, he said. Now I'm saving his peace of mind. I swallowed hard. You can't buy peace, Jeremy. You can only give it. The glass in his hand stilled. He looked up sharply, like he hadn't heard that word in years. Peace, he repeated. You think it's that simple? It was once. He walked toward the window, staring out over the gardens where Jaden was chasing sunlight. You talk like someone who hasn't lost everything. You'd be wrong, I said softly. He turned back. Then you know it doesn't work that way. I hesitated. The words came out before I could stop them. I had a brother, Thomas. He was 15 when the system took him from me. Jeremy didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly, listening. We grew up in foster care after our parents died, I said. He was good. Too good. When I couldn't keep a job, they said I wasn't fit to take care of him. They sent him to another home. 2 years later, I found out he'd overdosed. He'd been trying to make enough money to come back. The confession hung between us like smoke. I hadn't said his name in years. Jeremy's expression changed, not pity, not sympathy, but something closer to recognition. You blame yourself. Every day. He nodded slowly. Then you understand why I can't let anyone who threatens Jaden live. No, I said, my voice trembling. I understand grief. Not this. He exhaled sharply, turning away again, as if my words burned more than the truth he lived with. My wife died because I believed in mercy once. Someone begged me for it. I gave it. He faced me then, eyes colder than ever. 2 weeks later, she was shot leaving a hospital. A gift from the man I spared. The room went still. I could feel the weight of his past pressing down on both of us. That's why you think you're saving him, I whispered. Because you couldn't save her. His stare hardened. You're walking a dangerous line, Daniela. So are you, I said. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. The world outside the window kept moving, indifferent. Then Jeremy said quietly, almost to himself, "You're the only person in years who's spoken to me like that." He stepped closer. The air thickened. I could smell the faint trace of cologne, the sharp scent of whiskey. His voice dropped lower. "You have no idea," he whispered, "how dangerous it is to talk to me like that and make me listen." I should have looked away. I didn't. His hand brushed the edge of the desk, knuckles white, tension barely contained. "You think I enjoy this?" he said, softer now. "The violence, the fear? It's not enjoyment. It's the only language this world understands." "Maybe," I said, my throat tight. "But your son will learn that language too. And when he does, he won't have anything left of you worth saving." His eyes flickered, something between fury and heartbreak. Then slowly he nodded once. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met," he murmured, "or the most foolish. Maybe both." He smiled faintly, not cruelly this time, but like someone remembering what it felt like to mean something to another human being. The quiet between us shifted. Not peaceful, charged, dangerous. "Go back to your room, Daniela," he said finally. "Before I forget you're not part of this world." I wanted to argue, but something in his tone told me not to. I turned to leave, my hands still shaking. At the door, I heard him speak again, almost a whisper. "Peace," he said under his breath, like testing the word on his tongue. "Maybe someday." I didn't look back, but I knew, as I walked down the long hallway toward my locked room, that something had changed. Not in him. Not yet. In me. Because for the first time since I'd met Jeremy Gardner, I saw the man he was before the monster. And worse, I saw the part of myself that wanted to save him. The next morning, the house felt wrong. Not quieter, just heavier. Like every piece of marble, every framed portrait, was waiting for something to break. Jeremy didn't come down for breakfast. His chair at the head of the table stayed empty, and even the staff seemed relieved not to see him. Jaden ate in silence. He pushed his food around the plate, but didn't take a single bite. His small shoulders were tight, his eyes distant. "Hey," I said softly. "You feeling okay?" He looked up at me, hesitant. "Miss Daniela, do people sometimes wear masks when they don't want others to know who they are?" The question froze me. "Sometimes," I said carefully. "Why?" He fiddled with the hem of his sleeve. "One of Daddy's men, the one with the black gloves, he looked at me funny this morning. Like he knew." I tried to keep my expression calm, but my chest tightened. "What do you mean, knew?" Jaden's voice fell to a whisper. "He was one of the men who took me." The room tilted. The sound of the rain outside blurred into static. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. "Jaden," I said slowly, "are you sure?" He nodded hard. He had the same scar on his neck. I saw it when they put me in the car. I remember because he told me not to cry. My hands went cold. Without thinking, I glanced toward the hallway. A man had been standing there earlier, tall, broad, black gloves, even inside the house. He'd nodded politely when I passed. His name, I remembered, was Marco. And if Jaden was right, then a monster had been eating breakfast with us. I took his hand. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe now. Stay in your room. All right? Don't tell anyone yet. Not until I talk to your father." He clutched my hand tighter. "Don't tell Daddy," he begged. "He'll do something bad." But it was too late. Because as soon as I stepped into the hallway, Jeremy was already there. He must have heard us. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those pale, merciless eyes, told me he'd heard every word. "Who?" he said quietly. "Jeremy." "Who?" Jaden said it was Marco. For a heartbeat, the house went still. Then Jeremy turned on his heel and barked an order I didn't understand. 3 men appeared out of nowhere. "Find him," Jeremy said.
Now.
They vanished down the hall. I followed him into the study. Wait, you don't even know if it's true. He didn't look at me. My son doesn't lie. But he's traumatized. He could have mixed things up. Jeremy stopped, turned, and stepped closer until I could see the anger trembling just beneath his control. Daniela, he said quietly, if that man touched my son, I will burn the world to the ground to make him regret it. There was no reasoning with that kind of fury. He left before I could stop him, the slam of the door echoing through the hallways. For the rest of the day, the mansion pulsed with tension. I kept Jaden close, pretending everything was fine, while outside his window, I could see black cars moving in and out of the courtyard. Men with guns. Phones ringing. Orders whispered. Hours passed. No one told me anything. When night fell, the air shifted again. The piano stopped. The staff vanished. The house itself seemed to shrink. And then I heard it, muffled voices from below. I didn't need to ask where. The East Wing. The same place where screams had come from before. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stay still. Something in me, foolish, reckless, maybe human, made me walk toward that darkness. The corridor was dim, only one bulb flickering. I crept to the top of the stairwell that led underground and froze. Voices.
Low. Male.
Then a sound I will never forget, the dull, wet thud of a fist meeting flesh. Please, please, someone begged. And Jeremy's voice, calm, controlled. You betrayed blood. There's only one sentence for that. I backed away before I saw what came next. I didn't need to. Upstairs, I found Jaden standing in the hallway, clutching his toy truck. His eyes were wide, his lips trembling. Is Daddy mad? He asked. I knelt down, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He's just working, sweetheart. Come on, let's go back to bed. He looked past me, toward the staircase. I don't like when he works. Neither did I. I stayed with him until he finally drifted off, his small hand tangled in mine. I waited until his breathing steadied, then slipped out quietly. Downstairs, the hall lights were dimmed, the smell of iron and smoke still hanging in the air. I found Jeremy in the foyer just before midnight. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows. His hands, those steady, capable hands, were smeared with blood. He didn't look at me right away. He just stood there, staring at the floor as if seeing something far away. Is it done? I asked softly, though I wasn't sure why I spoke. He exhaled slowly. Yes. I swallowed. Was it true? He looked up then, and for a heartbeat, I saw something almost human flicker in his eyes. He confessed. Jeremy, I stepped closer, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. There had to be another way. He gave a small, humorless laugh. There's always another way. It just never ends well. You killed him in your own house. I made sure my son sleeps safely in it. I shook my head. You're teaching him that the only way to protect someone is to destroy everything else. He studied me quietly, like weighing whether to defend himself or admit I was right. And you, he said finally, you're teaching him that kindness doesn't get you killed. Maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe you haven't lived long enough in my world to see what happens to people like you. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the metallic tang of blood, the faint trace of his cologne fighting to cover it. You think this is cruelty, he said. It's survival. Then maybe survival isn't worth what it costs you. For the first time, he looked away. The muscles in his jaw flexed, like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. He was right here. All this time. The man who took my son. Who made him cry for help. He swallowed hard. Do you understand what that does to a father? I didn't answer. Because I did. And that scared me. He ran a hand over his face, leaving faint streaks of red. Then he whispered, more to himself than me. I told you before, mercy costs too much. He turned to go, but I stopped him. And what does peace cost, Jeremy? He paused, hand on the doorframe. More than either of us can afford. The door closed behind him. When I looked out the window moments later, I saw him cross the courtyard, disappear into the dark beyond the gates. He didn't come back that night. By morning, the sky was gray and heavy, and a black car I'd never seen before pulled up to the house, its front bumper splattered with mud. Jeremy stepped out. His shirt was torn. His knuckles were bruised raw. His eyes, pale, exhausted, met mine across the drive. No words passed between us. He didn't need to say what he'd done. The blood on his collar said it for him. And as he walked past me, I realized I didn't know if I was more afraid of the man he was, or of the part of me that wanted to understand him. 3 days passed before the blood dried from the house. Not the real blood that had been scrubbed, burned, buried. The kind that lingered was quieter, invisible, soaked into the walls and into the silence between breaths. Jeremy hardly spoke. The men avoided him like ghosts avoiding dawn. And Jaden clung to me more than ever, afraid, though he couldn't say why. The mansion, for all its size, felt smaller now, as if the storm outside had moved inside. I'd had enough. That evening, after putting Jaden to bed, I packed the few things I had, the same torn bag I'd carried the night I found him. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From exhaustion. From being trapped between mercy and madness for too long. The sound of thunder rolled in the distance. I found Jeremy in his study, the same place where everything began and ended, between whiskey bottles, firelight, and the ghost of his own restraint. He looked up when I entered, eyes shadowed, jaw rough with stubble. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said. "I'm leaving." The words dropped like a blade. He leaned back slowly, as though trying to decide whether to laugh or to rage. "You think you can just walk out? I'm not one of your people, Jeremy. You don't own me." "No," he said, standing. "But the men who took my son, their partners, they're still out there. They know your face. If they find you, I'll take my chances." He moved around the desk, closer now. "You don't understand what happens to people once they're seen near me. Once they've touched my world." "I didn't touch your world," I said, my voice rising. "It swallowed me." He flinched, barely, as if my words hit somewhere he didn't expect. "You think you're protecting me," I continued, "but you're not. You're just trying to control what you can't." He exhaled through his nose, slow and tight. "Control keeps people alive. Then maybe living isn't the same as being alive." We stared at each other. Too close now, too much unsaid between us. The firelight flickered against his face, painting him in gold and shadow. Something shifted in his expression. The fury softened into something I didn't recognize, something dangerous in a different way. He took a step closer. "Why do you always fight me?" "Because someone has to." His jaw flexed. "You could have asked for anything that night," he said quietly. "A house. Money. Freedom. Why did you stay?" The question hit deeper than I expected. For a moment, all I could hear was the wind rattling the windows. I looked at him, really looked. The lines on his face weren't carved from anger, but from loss. The kind of loss that doesn't heal, just hardens. "I stayed," I whispered, "because someone has to show your son what love without fear looks like." He blinked, slow, like the words took time to sink in. Then, for the first time since I met him, Jeremy Gardner looked uncertain. The silence between us thickened until it was almost unbearable. The storm outside cracked open, lightning flashing across his face. He reached for me before I could move, his hand brushing mine, hesitant at first, then sure, like he was crossing a line he'd drawn for himself long ago. His fingers were rough, still healing from violence. His touch was warm. "Daniela," he said, my name breaking slightly on his tongue. "You don't know what you're doing." "Neither do you," I whispered. Something snapped then, the distance, the restraint, all of it. His mouth found mine, and the world went silent. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't cruel either. It was the kind of kiss that came from everything unspoken, grief, guilt, hunger, loneliness, tangled into one impossible moment. The rain slammed against the windows like it wanted to drown the house, but neither of us moved. His hand slid to the back of my neck, and I could feel the tremor in him. A man used to power, shaking like someone learning what surrender feels like. And then, as suddenly as it started, I pulled away. The room was spinning. My breath came in sharp bursts, and his eyes, those terrible, beautiful eyes, searched mine like he was looking for something to hold on to. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't make this another thing you destroy." He stepped back, his face unreadable. "You think I wanted that? I think you don't know what you want anymore." He turned toward the fire, the flames painting him in restless color. "You shouldn't have come into my life." "I didn't. You brought me here." He closed his eyes briefly, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "You have no idea what happens to the things I care about. Then stop pretending you can't care." That was it, the thing he couldn't face. His silence said more than any threat ever could. In the next room, a sound broke the tension. Small, shaky sobs. "Jaden." I rushed out before Jeremy could stop me. The boy was standing at the top of the stairs, clutching his blanket, tears streaking his face. "Miss Daniela, are you leaving?" His voice cracked like glass. My heart split in two. I knelt, brushing his hair back. "Hey, it's okay. Don't go," he cried, throwing his arms around my neck. "Please don't go." Behind me, I heard footsteps. Jeremy stood there, silent, watching. The storm howled against the windows, wind pushing rain sideways against the glass. I hugged Jaden tighter. "I'm not going anywhere tonight," I whispered. "I promise." He calmed slowly, still hiccuping against my shoulder. When I finally tucked him back into bed, his fingers didn't let go until sleep took him. When I turned around, Jeremy was still in the doorway. The light from the hall carved his silhouette against the dark, tall, motionless, impossible to read. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Be the man he needs. The man you seem to think still exists in me." I stepped closer. "He doesn't need you to be perfect, Jeremy. He just needs you to stop hiding behind your scars." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing me not as a threat or a guest or even salvation, but something he couldn't categorize. For a moment, the silence between us softened. "You're not the man you think you are, Jeremy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darkened. "And what am I then?" "That's what terrifies you," I said, because I wasn't sure if I was speaking to him or to myself. He stared at me for a long time, and for the first time since I'd met him, Jeremy Gardner didn't have an answer. Morning came gray and hollow, like the sky itself had stopped trying. The air in the mansion carried a strange stillness, the kind that follows confessions no one meant to make. Jeremy hadn't spoken to me since that night. He moved like a shadow through his own house, distant but watching. And I, somehow, still couldn't bring myself to leave. Maybe it was Jaden's smile. Maybe it was the look in Jeremy's eyes before he broke it with anger. Maybe it was something I couldn't name yet, something softer, more dangerous. But 2 days later, I decided I had to go. The storm had passed. The air was cool, clean. The world outside those iron gates still existed, and I needed to breathe it. I told Mrs. Duval I was walking to the chapel on the edge of the property. She hesitated, long enough for me to see the fear behind her eyes, but said nothing. The path was lined with stone walls and wild ivy. My shoes sank into wet gravel. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight start to lift. The sound of birds, the smell of rain on dirt, they felt like freedom. And then I heard the engine. A black van came around the bend, too fast, too close. I froze. The door slid open before I could think. Hands grabbed me, rough, cold, practiced. One covered my mouth, another yanked me backward. The world spun. I kicked, clawed, screamed into their palms. My heel connected with someone's shin, but it wasn't enough. "Get her in the van," one of them barked. The sound of tires screeching drowned out everything, and then another vehicle slammed into theirs. Metal tore. Glass shattered. The men dropped me. I hit the ground hard, scraping my palms on gravel. Through the blur of rain and dust, I saw him, Jeremy. He wasn't dressed like a man anymore. He was a storm in motion, sleeves rolled, gun drawn, eyes colder than the steel he held. The first shot cracked the air like thunder. One man fell. Another tried to run, but Jeremy was faster. The world became sound and smoke, echoing violence that didn't belong anywhere near sunlight. When it was over, I was shaking, not from fear, but from the sight of him standing over the wreckage. His breathing was steady. His shirt was splattered with blood. He looked less like a man and more like the weapon his world had made him. He turned to me, and for a moment, I saw two Jeremies at once, the father who would kill for his son, and the monster who didn't know how to stop. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. He holstered the gun and crossed the distance in 3 long strides, grabbing my shoulders. His hands were trembling. "Did they touch you?" I shook my head. "No." He pulled me against him before I could finish. His heartbeat pounded against mine, erratic, unsteady. For a man built of control, he felt like he was coming apart. "I told you not to leave the house," he said against my hair. "You don't listen." I needed air. Air. He pulled back, eyes sharp. "You almost died for air." I flinched. "You can't lock me up forever, Jeremy." He stared at me, something wild flickering behind his calm. "Watch me." By the time we got back to the mansion, the gates were already closing. 2 of his men dragged the surviving kidnapper from the van's wreckage. The man was bleeding, begging. Jeremy didn't look at him once. He took me inside instead, down the marble hallway, past the servants pretending not to see, into his study. The fire was already burning there, as if it had been waiting for this. He turned to me, still shaking with the aftershock of fury. "You think this world gives second chances? That mercy means safety. I think you've mistaken control for love." His voice dropped low. "You think I do this because I like it?" "No," I said. "You do it because it's all you know." He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing mine. "I do it because it works." "It doesn't work, Jeremy. It just replaces one kind of fear with another." He laughed softly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't understand what just happened. They were going to take you, use you, make me watch. That's what my enemies do. Then you fight them, not me. I am fighting them." I took a step back. "By turning your home into a prison?" His expression hardened. "If that's what keeps you alive, then yes." He crossed to the door, twisted the lock, and the sound of it closing echoed in my chest like a verdict. "I won't let you leave again," he said. "Jeremy." "I mean it." I swallowed hard. "You're not protecting me. You're controlling me." "Call it what you want," he said. "But as long as they're out there, you're mine to keep safe." The firelight flickered across his face, and for a second, I saw the boy he must have once been. Scared, desperate, clinging to power because everything else had been taken. And God help me, I almost understood him. "I didn't ask you to save me," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "But you made me want to." That confession hung in the air, heavier than any threat he'd ever spoken. He took another step toward me, close enough that I could feel the heat of his skin, smell the faint trace of gunpowder and rain. "Do you know what happens to the things I care about, Daniela?" "Yes," I whispered. "You destroy them trying to keep them safe." His eyes darkened. "You've built a cage," I said, trembling now, "and called it safety." He stared at me for a long time before answering, quiet, final, chilling. "And you," he said, "walked into it willingly." The fire cracked behind him. The storm outside began again. And for the first time since I'd stepped into his world, I realized I wasn't just his guest, I was his hostage. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across the floor, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like the pause before an ending. The door was unlocked. Not by mistake. Jeremy had left it that way. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear Jaden's laughter echo faintly, a sound that used to warm me, now cutting straight through the silence, like something fragile on borrowed time. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bag already packed from the night before. Every part of me was trembling, not from fear this time, but from finality. Because I knew I couldn't stay. Not anymore. When I found Jeremy, he was in the garden, The same place where I'd once seen him standing with his son beneath a sky that looked almost forgiving.
He was alone now.
Hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. For a moment, I just watched him from the terrace. The man who had once terrified me now looked smaller somehow, like someone who'd built an empire out of grief and finally realized it couldn't keep him warm. When he turned, his eyes found me instantly. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question. "I have to." He nodded slowly, as if he'd known it all along. "You think you can just walk away from this world? I don't belong to it." He stepped closer. "You belong to something now. My protection, at least." I met his gaze and said quietly, "Protection shouldn't feel like a prison." That hit him.
His jaw tightened.
"You'd rather go back to that life? The diner? The streets?" "I'd rather wake up without wondering who you'll hurt next." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw fear behind his control. "You think leaving makes you safe?" he said. "It doesn't. It just makes you alone." "I've been alone before," I said softly. "I survived it." He ran a hand over his face, exhaling like he was trying to breathe through something that didn't have air. "And Jaden?" I swallowed hard. "He's why I have to go." His head snapped up. "What?" "If I stay," I said, "he'll grow up thinking this is normal. The violence, the fear, the silence that follows every scream. I can't be part of teaching him that." Jeremy's expression flickered. Pain, then anger, then nothing. "You think you're saving him for me?" "I'm saving him for you," I whispered. "For the part of you that still remembers what love looked like before it turned into war." He stared at me for a long time, the words sinking in like stones. Then he turned away. The wind moved through the garden, brushing the leaves, tugging at the loose thread of his sleeve. Finally he spoke. "When I met you that night in the church, I thought you were naive. A woman who didn't understand what she'd stepped into." "I didn't," I admitted. He nodded once. "And still you stayed." "I stayed because I thought I could make a difference," I said. "Because for a while, I believed the man who saved his son might still be saved himself." He looked back at me, eyes colder now, not out of cruelty, but resignation. "You don't know what I've done, Daniela." "I know enough," I said. "And I know who you are when you look at him." The silence stretched. Then, quietly, he reached into his coat pocket. When he pulled out his wallet, it was like déjà vu, the same motion, the same gesture from that night in the church. He opened it, pulled out a stack of $100 bills, and laid them across the table between us. "Name your price," he said. The words hit me like a ghost, the echo of a beginning I never asked for. I looked at the money, then at him. "You still think everything can be fixed by buying it?" "Not everything," he said softly. "But this I can try to make right." I shook my head. "You can't pay for mercy, Jeremy." His voice broke just a little. "Then what do I give you?" I met his eyes. "Let your son grow up to be better than you. That's the only price I'll ever name."
He didn't speak.
Didn't move. For a long time, he just stood there, breathing shallowly, as though that sentence had taken something from him that he didn't know how to give back. Finally, he nodded once. "You really think that's possible?" "I think it's the only thing that still is." He looked away, jaw tight. "You know I could stop you." "I know. And yet you don't run." I smiled faintly. "Because if you're going to stop me, you already would have." A long pause. Then, quietly, almost like a prayer, he said, "Go." I turned, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. But before I reached the gate, he spoke again. "Daniela." I stopped. He didn't look at me when he said it. "For what it's worth, thank you. For giving my son something I never could." I nodded, unable to speak, then walked away. The world outside the mansion was colder than I remembered, but it felt alive. Each step down that long drive felt like pulling myself out of a dream I wasn't supposed to survive. I didn't look back, because if I did, I might not have kept walking. Weeks passed. The city went on. The diner reopened. Life, somehow, continued. One afternoon, as I was finishing a late shift, someone left an envelope at the counter. No name. No return address. Just my name written in bold, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, there was a single photograph. Jaden, standing on a beach, sunlight spilling across his hair, holding a seashell up to the camera like a secret. No note. No explanation. But on the back of the photograph, in Jeremy's unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words.
He smiles now.
I held it for a long time, unable to stop the tears. That was how I knew he'd kept his promise, or at least tried to. And maybe that was enough. Because sometimes, the smallest mercy can be the loudest redemption. He opened his wallet and said, "Name your price." I should have asked for money. Instead, I asked for mercy. And that's how I became part of his world. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you felt something, even for a moment, then make sure to subscribe. Because more stories like this one are coming, stories about love, redemption, and the choices that define us. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and don't miss what's next. Sometimes, the smallest story can change the biggest heart.